And we're live.
Okay, so we are live. Well, let's wait a couple of minutes for people to join. And then what I will do is provide a introduction to the event, and then I will introduce each of you, and then we'll go into Jan Gustav's presentation.
Okay.
And as previously agreed, what we'll do is wait till the very end to answer questions. Users will be able to ask questions using the message board on the web page that they'll be viewing the webinar. So what I'll do is I'll collate those and then take out some of the most relevant ones and ask individual questions to each of you.
Good.
Great. So I just made the event live about a minute ago. Hello for our viewers. We're just waiting for some other people to join the call, and then we will get moving with our presentations and discussion on topics related to UNEP. So give us just a couple more minutes to wait for everyone. Just to say, for those that have just joined, we're waiting for additional viewers to log in, and then we will start the webinar. Okay, well, I think there's going to be some more people to join us shortly. But now that it's 2 p.m. GMT, I know that's 9 a.m. New York time. And is it 4 p.m. in Nairobi? So I think let's get going with the call. My name is Matthew Redding Smith from the organization Stakeholder Forum. Hello from London. We are joined by colleagues. Jan Gustav, who is our Senior Governance Advisor for Stakeholder Forum. He's joining us from Oslo. Are you there, Jan Gustav?
Yes, I am.
Welcome.
Thank
and
you.
Then we have Fatu Ndoye from UNEP in Nairobi. Are you there, Fatu?
Hi, I'm here.
Welcome. And then we also have Marcus Orlena from Geneva. It's Geneva today, isn't it?
That is correct. Good afternoon.
Welcome. Welcome. Well, shortly, each of you will be providing presentations on the upcoming UNEA, which is the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is scheduled. Let's see. It's coming up. Well, when are the dates, Jan Gustav?
It starts on Monday, the 23rd of June, and it should end successfully on the 29th.
Okay, wonderful. Well, for those that are joining us, the purpose of this online event is to familiarize stakeholders with the United Nations Environment Assembly. We want to review engagement opportunities for UNEA, as well as its relationship to the United Nations Environment Program and the wider UN system. And then a topic that I'm sure a majority of us are working on is the post-2015 development agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. UNEA plays an important role, and today we'll be discussing its relationship to the post-2015 process as well. So what we would like to hear from all of you, for the audience members out there, is your questions. Towards the end of the event, we will be asking the panelists your questions, so please feel free to post them on the message board below the video feed of the webinar. Or alternatively, you can send me an email at mreddingsmith@stakeholderforum.org. Those details are provided in the most recent confirmation email. So yes, on that, let's get started. And to begin with, Jan Gustav will be providing a history of UNEP and the Rio Plus 20 conference and how it played a big role in getting UNEA started. So Jan Gustav, off to you.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll go into technology and get my screen moving and hope this works. And with your help, I hope I will be able to upload it. And I should be there now. Is that correct?
Let's see. Let's take a look. Yes, I can see your presentation.
Thank you. Then I'll go ahead and start my presentation. And I guess I started off with a slight misrepresentation of the dates. The UNEA, the UN Environment Assembly, will start on the 23rd and it will end on the 27th. And it will be preceded by two important days that civil society has, 21st and 22nd, but my colleagues will come back to that. To my viewers, wherever you are in the world, what follows are about 40 slides. They all contain a lot of information, as I have written here. I will not always read everything, so some of the slides I will just jump across quite quickly. And the slides are there for you to use later on when you want to come back and look at this more in a more careful way. So it all started in 1972 with the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, one of the two state leaders that were there for the occasion. The other state leader was Prime Minister Olof Palme of Sweden. And Indira Gandhi gave a seminal speech, and a few quotes from her is important. She said, "Are not poverty and the need the greatest polluters? The environment cannot be improved in conditions of poverty, nor can poverty be eradicated without the use of science and technology." This was echoed a number of years later by Kofi Annan when he gave another address then to the General Assembly in New York based on a report he had initiated called In Larger Freedom. One paragraph there is of particular importance and interest to us, and that is paragraph 57, which states, "We fundamentally depend on natural systems and resources for our existence and development. Our efforts to defeat poverty and pursue sustainable development will be in vain if environmental degradation and natural resource depletion cannot continue unabated." In a few days, on the 23rd, a historic event will take place in Nairobi, the first ever UN Environment Assembly. I would say this is the result of 40 years of governance and institutional development, of environmental engagement, of environmental research. It's a result of 40 years of growing environmental understanding, and it is also the result of 40 years of work to go beyond what is politically often acceptable. The UNA must be an event whose outcome will signal to the world the importance global politicians attach to environmental issues. An event whose outcome will signal to the people of the world the importance decision makers attach to the principles of good governance, such as participation, accountability, and transparency. and it must be an event whose outcome will give the direction of environmental policies for years to come. How did we come this far? Did it all start in 1972 with the Stockholm Conference and with his Secretary General Maurice Strong here chairing the meeting and opening the very important conference at the time? Now, one thing on the UN is its fantastic opportunities that it offers all peoples of the world. It gives us an opportunity to put issues on the political agenda that is not really there. And this is actually what happened with UNEP. Which were the issues people were concerned about back in the 60s and the 70s, and that provided the context of UNEP? A number of issues were on the agenda. We had the publication of Silent Spring, a seminal book on the pollution and pesticides of the world. Famous oceanographist and scientist Rachel Carson published this book, and I would say if we had listened to her then, the world would have been much better off. The debate was going, and there were a number of environmental disasters that went unchecked. 1967, a big tanker named the Torrey Canyon went on ground just outside of England, and the oil spill in the British Channel was devastating to maritime life there. But there were others. In 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio caught fire, and it burned for several days because it was a quagmire of chemical pollution. The 60s saw the Minamata mercury scandal, people dying of mercury pollution, which was emptied into the Minamata Bay. And Northern Europe experienced massive fish deaths because of transboundary and long air transported pollution. Acidification of the waters was a result. And the Rhine itself exposed to the same issue where fish were dying. So times were becoming right for a global institution to deal with global environmental policies and for global environmental action. But the question asked, did decision makers understand the severity of these problems? Well, in the lead up to Stockholm, the UN was pushing for this, and Sweden was in the lead, and many of the protagonists for UNEP were afraid of a number of things. Two things might really put a spanner in the works. One was the perceived and also direct opposition from private sector, which wanted too much regulation. And the other one was a problem that arose in the south among southern-based nations, developing nations, who were afraid of the north using the environment as a green conditionality and hinder industrial development in the south. So creating an understanding for all this was a humongous task. And in many ways, one could say that UNEP started from scratch. The research availability of environmental science was not there. The global understanding was not there. But we needed an institution. But it wasn't all about the UN not having done anything on the environment. They had, in several of the organizations, specialized agencies, actually performed a number of environmental tasks, one might say. UNESCO, famous for man and biosphere programs in the late 60s and the 70s. The UN Maritime Organization, based in London, had worked on the pollution of the oceans. The World Meteorological Organization, based in UNEP, had worked on atmospheric issues, but no organization had tried to coordinate all these issues on a cross-sectoral basis. So the mandate of UNEP came as a result of the Stockholm Conference. This was emphasized and reiterated in 1997 at the 19th GC, or Governance Council for UNEP, where the Governing Council strongly stated that UNEP is the preeminent organization to deal with environment inside the UN. And paragraph 2 is here for you to read, which is the mandate of UNEP. Well, form must follow function, and the discussion on this issue went very high at the time. The Stockholm Declaration from 1972 had 109 recommendations, mostly directed to the environmental issues being coordinated inside the UN. Countries debated the size of the institution, and many big countries wanted a small unit. Actually, the same problem as we face today with the high-level political forum, the HLPF, which I will come back to a little bit later. And the decision to situate UNEP in Nairobi was not necessarily the result of all environmental engagement, but of politics deciding where to develop the UN globally. At its first governing council in 1973, which was actually held in Geneva, water was targeted as a priority area for UNEP. Going through 40 years of history is not an easy task, so let me focus on some of the biggest and perhaps to many the surprising successes. The ozone layer, big success, and not today associated with UNEP, but UNEP started working on the ozone layer already in the 70s. People working in UNEP picked up on the issue that scientists were talking about, that the ozone layer was shrinking, thus exposing all living mechanisms to increasing ultraviolet radiation. The work of UNEP resulted in the Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer, which is a protocol to the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer, decided between 1985 and 87. And I think we can say with emphasis today, UNEP helped save the ozone layer by its works. Another success story is UNEP's work on climate issues. It started to work on these issues also in the 70s, working with the World Meteorological Organization, and together they established IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in 1988, which today provides the most cutting-edge research and scientific issues on climate change. And IPCC actually was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. All of this work led to the UNFCCC, the Climate Convention, which was signed in 1992 in Rio, and today has a life of its own. Work in biodiversity is another hallmark success of UNEP, working on biodiversity and trying to get a regulation of trade vis-a-vis biodiversity. And on January 29 in 2000, a meeting chaired by Colombian Minister of Environment Juan Meyer actually finished working on the biosafety protocol. And as I write, it was agreed changing the ground rules under which trade versus environment was conducted in favor of the environment. Work on environmental law is another victory or success for UNEP. They've been pushing regulations and normative statements on environmental all through its 40 years of existence, and started in the 1980s to really develop the environmental issues into laws and law systems. It started in the environmental normative and law processes already in 1972, when the CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, became the first ever multilateral environment agreements. And today, there are actually more than 700 MEAs, counting all from global through regional to those that only concern a few countries. And the chemical conventions are a point in case of UNEP's work. Today, there are 4 conventions on chemical issues under one joint secretariat, which was initially set up by UNEP. We have the Basel Convention controlling transboundary movements of hazardous wastes, the Rotterdam Convention on prior informed consent, the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants, and the Minamata Convention on mercury, which was added last year. And of course, working with the global NGO community. In the year 2000, the Malmö Declaration was decided by the Governing Council at the time, emphasizing the necessity to involve NGO community of the world, including members of civil society and research into the work of UNEP. UNEP pioneered this work already in 1972 when it set up a parallel conference on environment, and has been working with them ever since. And another success which is often overlooked is that UNEP pioneered and brought together science, research, politics, and implementation. And today, elements of UNEP, which is not well known but should be known, is the grid system, the Infoterra system, the GEMS, and of course all this is being popularized through the GEO reports, which are available for the public at large. All these issues have helped bring the consciousness of the world on environment forward. But today, UNEP is faced with new tasks and challenges, and they started in the 1990s. Actually, interestingly enough, the initiative to establish a commission to work on sustainable development was taken by UNEP. In 1982, the Governing Council, 10 years after UNEP was established, published a State of the World report on trying to find out what the world looked like in terms of environment. This brought together an initiative proposed to the General Assembly to set up a commission which later would be named the Brundtland Commission, and its report was called Our Common Future, which was one of the key documents for the Rio 1 conference to take place in Rio in 1992. I say here UNCED 1992, WSSD 2002, and UNCED UNCSD in 2012, or Rio 1, Johannesburg, and Rio Plus 20. These are three summits conferences held under the auspices of the UN General Assembly. And using the findings of the Brundtland Commission, they further refined and developed a concept of sustainable development with its three dimensions: economy, social issues, and environment. And the challenge is, where would UNEP be in this sustainable development equation? Rio Plus 20, the outcome document, reiterates that UNEP is the preeminent organization on environmental issues within the UN. But the sustainable development has, as I said, three dimensions, and these three dimensions are now coming together as a new operative plan of action called Post-2015. The outcome of Rio was also to establish the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, and the institutional home for the SDGs and the Post-2015 agenda will be the high-level political forum established in New York. So far, member states have outlined 16 or 17 focal SDG areas, and environment plays a heavy role there. But the question is, where will UNEP be in all of this? This is part of the discussion that will take place in UNEA next week. And the challenge is, of course, big. Sustainable development with three dimensions, environment is one. How can UNEP be a contributor to this in the future? Sustainable consumption and production, SCPE for short, has always been a high on the agenda for UNEP, and by the Rio outcome document, UNEP was given yet another mandate to pursue these issues. The first decade of UNEP's work, from 1972 to 82, member states by and large fulfilled their pledges and managed to keep UNEP going financially. But since the beginning of the 1980s, finance was difficult to attain, and today, with the universal membership, which was also decided by the Rio outcome document, I think financing UNEP in the future and the environmental programs will remain one of the biggest challenges that UNEP is facing. We will have to say to the world, we need to finance this organization. And then finally, governance, a crucial issue. One of the key agenda points for Rio Plus 20 was IFSD, or the Institutional Framework for Sustainable Development. UNEP has its own version, the International Environmental Governance, and from day one in 1972 until today, this has been a very, very important issue. How can we work to make sure that UNEP is a transparent, accountable, and participatory organization? With the universal membership, new challenges are on the agenda, and this UNEA is the first conference where UNEP will experience what universal membership means. And now what? To conclude, I would refer again to Maurice Strong in 1972, who said, what is important is perhaps not so much what happens at the conference, but then the follow-up process. And in the discussion about institutional arrangement, the mantra of the day in 1972, as it is today, is form should follow function. In other words, decisions about new institutional structures should not be taken unless there is broad agreement for action in any particular field. And what, if anything, will there be agreements about at UNEA? We hold in our hands the possibility to create an environmentally sustainable future. I will also say that the decision makers in UNEA holds the same promise. We need to be vigilant, but today we have a platform and an organization through which we can work. And if you're interested in this, which I hope you are, there are a number of fantastic sources. I would mention two. One book published by UNEP in Nairobi called UNEP, The First 40 Years. And the other one is a great publication from Stockholm to Johannesburg and beyond by Lars-Göran Engfeldt, published by the Swedish government offices. Read more and be fascinated. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Jan Gustav, for that informative overview. If anyone has any questions for Jan Gustav on the history of UNEP and how UNEA will feed into and influence the post-2015 development agenda, please provide your questions in the comment bar directly below the video feed. For those that are just joining us, this is a webinar on familiarizing stakeholders with the United Nations Environment Assembly. As we all know, the first ever Environmental Assembly will take place between June 23rd and June 27th in Nairobi, Kenya. As one of the many outcomes from Rio Plus 20, the UN Environment Program was granted universal membership, leading to the establishment of the UN Environment Assembly, which has participation from all 193 member states. It's also important to note that UNEP was also designated by the Rio Plus 20 conference to be the preeminent body within the UN to deal with the environment. Jan Gustav's presentation, as well as the presentations from Fatu and Marcus, will be available on the events webpage as soon as the event finishes. And if you came a little late, the webinar will be archived on YouTube as well, so you'll be able to watch it in its entirety or jump around to the parts of the presentations that are most relevant for you. With that, Fatu Ndoye from Nairobi is going to give a presentation on the rules of engagement and agenda for the first ever Environmental Assembly. Fatu, are you there? I think if you could just unmic.
Yes.
Currently,
Do
you are
hear me
muted.
now?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you to Jan Gustav for this history of UNEP. I will now move on to load my presentation. If you just give me a minute. Voila. Well, thank you very much to all of you for joining us this afternoon. And again, thank you to Jan Gustav for this presentation on UNEP's history and the foundation of the UNEA. My presentation this afternoon will focus on the structure of the UNEA, its agenda, and the rules of engagement for major groups and stakeholders. And I have here with me in the room other colleagues. I have with me Alexander Juras, the chief of the Major Groups and Stakeholders branch of UNEP, and Radhika Roy, one of our colleagues here in the team. First of all, I would like to say that the institutional reform of UNEP was born out of Rio Plus 20 in June 2012, and it resulted especially in paragraph 88 on strengthening and upgrading UNEP as the leading global environment authority, as Jan Gustav had just pointed out. Subsequently, UNEP was granted universal membership, moving from a 58 member governing body named as the Governing Council, and which was established in 1972, to be replaced by a membership of 193 member states and observer states of the United Nations. At the first universal session of the Governing Council, which was held in February last year, member states recommended to the UN General Assembly that the Governing Council be renamed the United Nations Environment Assembly of the United Nations Environment Programme. And this was formally adopted through a resolution in March 2013. The first session of the UNEA will be held here in the UNEP headquarters from 23rd to 27th of June, and it will be preceded by a series of events that I will take you through at a later stage. The UNEA has the dual mandate of being the highest global political forum on environmental issues and at the same time the governing body of UNEP, and as such is mandated to take strategic decisions, provide technical guidance in the work of UNEP, and promote a strong science policy interface and ensure that environmental sustainability is recognized as a global priority. Decision 27.2 in its paragraph 5 was adopted in February 2013 at the first universal session of the UNEP Governing Council, and it spells out clearly that UNEA has to include in its 5 days a high-level segment as an integral part of the governing body of UNEP, and it is mandated to set the global environmental agenda, among other things, to provide overarching policy guidance and defining policy responses to address emerging environmental challenges, and setting the strategic guidance on the future direction of the United Nations Environment Programme. So as you can see, the mandate of the UNEA is quite vast, and it features also quite an important element regarding stakeholder engagement. The structure of the UNEA is based on two main elements. The UNEA itself, which is the assembly which convenes every 2 years for 5 days in even years, and its subsidiary organs, here featured in the slide as the Committee of Permanent Representatives, which is the CPR. So the Committee of Permanent Representatives is the subsidiary organ of the UNEA, and as such is mandated to meet every 3 months throughout the year and convene in an open-ended meeting 3 months prior to the UNEA for 5 days as well in even years as a prepcom to the UNEA itself. The UNEA also holds thematic debates and ad hoc meetings to really advance the work of the subsidiary body and prepare for the UNEA itself. And all of these elements of the structure and the mode of operation of the UNEA is contained in the same decision 27.2 of last year's universal session. In addition to this, the UNEA has a bureau which is composed of 10 members. Excuse me, I just got a message requesting me to switch to full slide view. I hope it is now better for all the viewers. So the UNEA Bureau is composed of 10 members to reflect the universality of the governing body in accordance with equitable geographical distribution, and to really be able to serve all the 193 UN member states, as opposed to the Governing Council Bureau, which only had 5 members. Now, the UNEA was preceded by the work of the open-ended meeting of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, and that meeting took place in March this year for 5 days, and it really looked at the agenda of the UNEA and made a number of significant contributions towards the agenda of the UNEA, provided advice on a number of policy matters, and reviewed reports, draft decisions that are going to be presented at the UNEA, and really looked into convening thematic and programmatic debates to prepare for the UNEA. During the intersessional period, which is between March and now, the Committee of Permanent Representatives continued its work and examined again a number of reports and policy documents to be approved by the UNEA, as well as a number of decisions expected to be adopted by the UNEA. So far, we have about 19 decisions that will be for UNEA's consideration, with 12 decisions already presented to the CPR and available to the public on the UNEA website. And I would like us to reflect a little bit on the expectations from UNEA. And major expectations from member states, from major groups and stakeholders, from other intergovernmental bodies, etc., are that UNEA will send a powerful message to the world on behalf of ministers of environment and spell out concrete actions to address the key environmental challenges to be discussed at the UNEA. That UNEA will also recommend resolutions for adoption at the UN General Assembly on the system-wide cooperation on environment. That UNEA will also contribute to the discussions happening in New York right now on the post-2015 development agenda and on the SDGs, but will also address a powerful message on a few emerging global threats, such as illegal trade in wildlife, the environmental rule of law, and financing green economy. UNEA is expected to take decisions, and it will take decisions, for example, on the UNEP program of work and budget for the coming 4 years. It will also take a number of decisions on the state of the environment reporting, or a number of decisions on chemicals management, air quality, etc. But most importantly, the UNEA will result in a report which will summarize all the discussions happening throughout the week, and which will be submitted to the UN General Assembly through ECOSOC. It is also envisaged that the UNEA will adopt formal decisions. I referred to 19 decisions that are currently tabled and being presented to the UNEA for adoption. But it is also going to result in a number of resolutions regarding, for example, illegal trade, or hopefully in a declaration that will sanction the discussions of the ministers on sustainable development goals and post-2015 development agenda. But all these elements of the outcomes of the UNEA are still under discussion by the Committee of Permanent Representatives. But really here, the key discussion revolves around what is really the difference between resolutions, declarations, recommendations, and a decision. A resolution, according to the UN, is a formal action on substantive matters, and decisions are formal actions other than resolutions, non-substantive or routine on non-substantive or routine matters, as we call it in our jargon. And in the past, declarations have also been adopted in the form of resolutions. So all of it is very confusing indeed, but ultimately ministers may agree to a declaration that will be presented in addition to the report of the UNEA to the ECOSOC and to the other UN bodies. Now I'm going to move to the schedule of the UNEA, and I will apologize for the quality of this slide. And you will be able to retrieve this schedule on the website after the call ended. It is just to show you the different types of activities in a snapshot that will take place during the week. We will start the week of the UNEA with the Global Major Groups and Stakeholders Forum, which is going to happen over Saturday and Sunday, and which is a preparatory meeting of major groups and stakeholders to the UNEA. And one of the major highlights of this civil society forum is the open dialogue major groups will be able to have with the executive director of UNEP, Achim Steiner.
Fatu, sorry to interrupt, but I believe you've moved on to the next slide, but we're still seeing the slide that gives an overview of UNEA's structure. If you are able to exit slideshow and go into just normal screen view, I think we'll be able to view the slide. And once you've gone into normal screen view, you should be able to reload the slide. I know it's tedious and a little slow, but I think that's the best way to present the next PowerPoint slide.
Do you see it now?
Let me take a look. No, I do not. So if you go to screen share one more time.
Are we on now?
Let's take a look. There we are. I can see that. That's great.
Okay.
And then I think you can go into full screen mode. So the slide share.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. So this slide provides really an overview of what the week will look like and the number of parallel events that are happening throughout the week. And the opening of the UNEA is expected to happen on Monday, followed by what we call the session in the afternoon of the Committee of the Whole, which is the committee that will look at all the relevant decisions that need to be adopted by the end of the week and will finalize those decisions and documents. We have a series of side events that are also highlighted for the Monday, but throughout the week they're highlighted in light pink. And so they will happen, all of them at the same time throughout up to Thursday. And they will focus on different themes. And these are not officially part of the UNEA, but they're just organized as information sessions. And they are organized by member states in partnership with stakeholders and other UN entities and organizations. You will see in yellow all the official sessions of the UNEA, and many of them will be in plenary form. And you will also see in blue 2 symposia that are organized in parallel on the environmental rule of law and on financing a green economy. So this slide really gives you an overview of the diversity of issues that will be covered throughout the week, and the different ministerial events and sessions that will also take place during the week. So these are just a few elements of the agenda of the UNEA. Except for the thematic issues to be addressed at the high-level segment, all these issues will be addressed during the sessions of the Committee of the Whole. And as I referred to earlier on, the Committee of the Whole is expected to adopt 19 decisions or more, and as well as propose new rules of procedures for UNEA. And this is one of the important issues that we will address in this first session of the UNEA, and which is of key importance to the entire conduct of the UNEA, the rules of procedures. So potential contentious issues include indeed the adoption of these rules of procedures. Many of the rules are open for discussion, and another potentially contentious issue is that of major groups and stakeholders' participation in the processes of UNEA and its subsidiary organs. So you will see that we have quite a number of reports that will be presented, and most of these reports will be supported by a formal decision. And for example, we expect to have a decision on stakeholder engagement, one on strengthening science and policy interface. But we also have a few issues that are presented to the UNEA for information, such as UNEP's access to information policy, and so on and so forth. So now I would like to move on to the other part of the UNEA. It's the high-level segment. As I was pointing out earlier on, the UNEA is expected to conclude its 5 days of work with a 2-day high-level segment that will bring together ministers of environment, but also ministers from other sectoral ministries to address two issues that were debated and adopted and approved by the Committee of Permanent Representatives. They were debated for almost a year now. So the Assembly is expected to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals and the post-2015 Development Agenda, including sustainable consumption and production. And the second theme of the ministerial high-level segment is illegal trade in wildlife. For both themes, a number of background documents have been prepared, and for the first theme on SDGs and post-2015 development agenda, discussions are still ongoing at the Committee of Permanent Representatives as to whether it will result in a resolution or a declaration in addition to the UNEA report. And the discussion on illegal trade in wildlife is expected to be in a slightly different format than the usual UN meetings. This ministerial dialogue will form part of the ministerial segment, but it will be held in the evening of the 26th of June from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Nairobi time. It is expected to build on previous and ongoing initiatives and to allow ministers to exchange views and experiences on the challenges and progress towards addressing the illegal trade in wildlife. So the session will be recorded in the form of a chair's summary and will be included in the meeting report of the UNEA. In addition, it is anticipated that the dialogue will be validated by a decision which will be considered during the Committee of the Whole sessions with a view to adoption during the closing session of the Friday afternoon. So now moving on to the last part of the presentation, which is really the rules of engagement. The current rules of engagement date back for most of them from 1998. There are a set of 72 rules which guide the organization and conduct of the sessions of the governing body of UNEP, the process for developing and submitting the agenda of the meeting of the governing body, the voting procedures, the organization and conduct of public or private meetings, and the participation of observers such as non-governmental organizations, let's say the major groups and stakeholders.
Just quickly,
During
Fatou.
discussions.
Are you there, Fatou?
Yes.
Have you moved on to another slide?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So if you could just exit slide share view and go to normal full screen view. From there, you'll be able to move to the next slide. And once you've done that, you can go in to, again, full slide share view. There seems to be a problem with loading the change of slides when you've selected slide share view. So yes, could you please do that?
Yes. Do you have now the current slide on the rules of procedure?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. I can see it clearly. And just for all the viewers, these PowerPoint presentations will be made available on the event web page immediately after the webinar. And you will also receive an email containing all the resources for the event. So if you're having any difficulty reading the content from the PowerPoint during the call, we will send them to you immediately after. Thank you. Back to you, Fatu.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. And I was about to conclude on this particular slide, but I would maybe just come back to it briefly regarding the current discussions aimed at adopting the new rules of procedures for UNEA. They are happening right now within the Committee of Permanent Representatives that are still meeting to prepare for the UNEA. And quite a number of rules are up for, let's say, redrafting. And um, so right now, most of these rules will change. I will provide eventually a link to the current rules of procedures and the document as it stands now for everybody's information. The opportunities for engagement for major groups and stakeholders. Here is a list of all the events happening throughout the week, and that will provide an opportunity for stakeholders to interact with member states and other participants of the UNEA. All sessions are open to all accredited major groups and stakeholders participating in the event. And here the important word is accreditation. All major groups and stakeholders will have that are attending or that have pre-registered to attend the event have accreditation. Such UNEA events is only open to accredited organization with a few exceptions made in terms of speakers and resource persons sometimes. So all sessions are open to all accredited major groups participating in the event unless otherwise decided by the chair of a particular meeting. Remember, we're still operating under rules of procedures of the Governing Council that date back from the 1980s. And this, for example, is one of the issues under discussions right now within the Committee of Permanent Representatives regarding the participation of observers. Several working groups or contact groups are expected to be established at the first meeting of the Committee of the Whole on program of work and budget, for example, on chemicals, to name just a few. And major groups will have opportunities to participate in all these events, but also participate in UNEA plenaries and open sessions, Committee of the Whole plenaries, opening plenary of the high-level segment and the ministerial plenaries and dialogues of the Thursday and Friday, and ministerial roundtables, if any, if some are created. Other opportunities to engage will also revolve around the green room, but I will come back to it shortly. Really, the access to meetings is also goes hand in hand with designated seats reserved for all major groups. I will show you later on the list of the 9 major groups that will have these designated seats. Major groups will also have access to all in-session documents, decisions, and conference room documents. And they will also have access to a online portal that will only be available to those physically present here in Nairobi. Major groups will also have an opportunity to make oral statements and written input. Those will have to be, for example, the written inputs will have to be submitted to the Secretariat for them to be posted on the online portal and to be hence accessible to all member states participating into the events. All the other sessions, as I was saying earlier, are open to major groups except if the chair or the president of those sessions decide otherwise. And the UNEA will be conducted in all 6 UN languages. So here is the list of the 9 major groups and the designated 9 major groups and the seat allocation. And the coordination will be done through the major groups facilitating committee and regional
Apologies,
representatives.
Fatu.
And Marcos.
Sorry to interrupt
Yes.
again, but we're having a problem loading the PowerPoint page. Could you exit full screen one more time and then
Yes.
just manually move to the next page, and then you can go back to full screen slide share.
So
Wonderful.
coordination of the major groups and stakeholders participation will be done through the major groups facilitating committee, which I believe Marcos is going to present right after. So I will not dwell too much on it. And we will have daily morning briefings of all major groups and stakeholders participating in the events in what we call the Green Room. The Green Room is a space dedicated for major groups and stakeholders to hold caucus meetings, side events, consultations with member states if need be. And for now, we have quite a number of events scheduled to take place in the Green Room. 28 events from Monday to Thursday. And the schedule is also posted on the UNEP website, and you can have an overview of the different themes that will be addressed. One of the the last thing I wanted to mention on this slide is major groups and stakeholders will have also specific badges that would allow them to participate and access all meetings and all sessions without any restriction. Now, just for your information, I hope you can see this slide. It is just a snapshot for your information of all pre-registered participants to give you an idea of the number of major groups.
Unfortunately, terribly sorry, Fatu. Unfortunately, we can't see it. Or I think I might be mistaken. It has now loaded. Apologies for interrupting.
Yes, so this slide indeed is just for information to give you an overview of the different types of participants that have pre-registered for the UNEA and where they're coming from in terms of regions and in terms of major groups. You will see that there is a vast majority of NGOs that have registered for the event, and there are also some regions that are more represented than others, such as Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and Europe. This slide is really for information, and we can also give more information to those interested later on. And I will end the presentation, and I hope you can see this slide with a number of links that are provided here. The first one is the link to the UNEA website. And here I want to say that we have a UNEA website in 6 different languages. So you can access the UNEA website in French, in Spanish, in any other language, and most of the documents are being translated and being uploaded to the UNEA. These links provide access to documents that are quite important, such as the annotated provisional agenda, which is a document that can guide you through the discussions, the agenda items, and the thematic issues, and the corresponding background documents or reference documents. And there is also a link to the PaperSmart system for those of you who will be in Nairobi. This link, you will be able to access this link as soon as you get into the UN premises on Monday. So you will have access to conference room documents and decisions, and any changes to the structure or agenda of the UNEA will be also made available there. So I would like to thank you all for your attention and for your interest in the UNEA and in the work of UNEP. And I would like to apologize for the technical hiccups. And back to you, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatou, for that helpful presentation on the structure and modes of operation for UNEA. If people had any difficulty viewing the PowerPoint, it will be circulated to you after the event and also made available on the event's webpage. So from there, I think this leads in perfectly to Marcus's presentation on NGOs, civil society, and UNEP, and how civil society is going to benefit from UNEA and means of engagement, and what are the likely hot topics for NGOs at the week-long meeting. So yes, Marcus, are you there?
Thank you, Matthew. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you all here today to speak about why does UNEA matter to civil society. My name is Marcos Orellana. I'm with the NGO Major Group, and in this process, I am co-chairing the Major Group's Facilitating Committee. And I will open this presentation today to speak about just a second. To speak about UNEA, civil society, and global public interests. Can you see the PowerPoint at this time?
I can see it, Marcus.
Thank you. And if the slides do not transfer or move, please let me know. Thank you. So as I was saying, this presentation will address the question, well, why should civil society be concerned about UNEA? Why is UNEA significant for UNEP and for civil society's work? And the basic message in this regard is that that civil society cannot remain absent at this time when the planet is facing a global environmental crisis from the governance and institutional structures that have been set up by the international community to address this crisis. It is an imperative, I would say, for civil society to engage in order to strengthen and build a partnership with the UN Environment Programme in order to enable the international community to overcome the root causes that are driving environmental degradation worldwide. And in this presentation, I intend to explore three basic themes relating to this basic proposition. The first one, what are the spaces and roles available for civil society in UNEA? Second, what is the Major Groups Facilitating Committee and what is the role of the regional representatives? How can the MGFC, the acronym, help facilitate civil society's input to UNEA? And third, to talk about what will be this year's Global Major Groups and Stakeholder Forum, focusing on a common message that civil society can deliver to the Environmental Assembly of the UNEP, and the work that will focus on thematic clusters. If I may ask, are the slides moving?
I'm seeing the new slides, yes.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. So if we move right along to talk about UNEA and civil society, different spaces and roles, we can identify at least 3 spaces and the roles that civil society can play therein. First of all is agenda setting. In this regard, stakeholder engagement policies go hand in hand with UNEP's development as the key organization for setting the global environmental agenda. If civil society and other stakeholders can help to shape UNEP's agenda, they will become more engaged, and UNEP's agenda will be more relevant to civil society's concerns. Attention must be given to ensure true engagement at the appropriate entry points in agenda setting for major processes, such as UNEA, and thereby to contribute to deliberations on an equal basis with governments, but without the right to vote. The key point here is that so far UNEP's agenda has been criticized by many as being limited and perhaps not all the time as relevant to the world's environmental problems as it should be. In order for UNEP's agenda to be relevant, civil society must participate in the agenda setting processes, and there are some spaces where civil society can do so, and I'll come back then to that question. A second big space and role is participation in decision making. In this context, the proposition is quite plain. Civil society and stakeholders should have opportunities to participate in decision making at an earlier stage and should have standing to contribute to deliberations on an equal basis with governments, but again, without the right to vote. And I emphasize this question of voting because often in these discussions it is said that the UN is an intergovernmental process, and it is. What civil society has been asking for is not to be recognized as a government with a right to vote, but instead to have a meaningful opportunity to participate in decision making so as to ensure that decisions are as robust as possible, as connected with reality as possible, as capable of being implemented as possible. And that takes me then to the third point in this slide, the issue of implementation. Now this depends on themes, on needed capacities, but in any event, without adequate implementation at the national level, at the local level, at the regional level of the decisions and resolutions adopted by the UN Environmental Assembly, then this meeting becomes disconnected from reality, becomes another global big meeting that may adopt very interesting decisions and resolutions, but they are not implemented in practice. This is the challenge of implementation, and civil society has a very important role to play in that process. So having seen this this question of spaces and roles, then we can think about and talk about what the major groups facilitating committee is, and as well as the role of regional representatives. As pointed out by Jan Gustav and Fatou earlier, UNEP adopts a major groups approach that is established in Agenda 21. Let's recall Agenda 21, the blueprint for sustainable development elaborated at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. Agenda 21 identifying the voices in society that are most relevant for a global conversation about sustainable development. The major groups were already identified in an earlier slide, so I won't get into identifying the 9. What is important to note is that when it comes to accreditation criteria, every organization that is accredited to UNEP has been required to show that it has interest and work in the environment. And so the organizations appearing and attending and participating have a proven record of shown interest in the environment, and thereby the environmental voice of the 3 dimensions of sustainable development can be strengthened, again in light of the process towards strengthening UNEP as the leading global environmental agenda setting entity. How are major groups organized? Generally, this is the second bullet, generally they are self-organized, or by principle they are self-organized. Elections take place within each major group and 2 representatives are chosen. These 2 representatives of each of the 9 major groups then compose the major groups facilitating committee that has 3 co-chairs. In addition, in each region, regional representatives are also elected and they participate in the work of the major groups facilitating committee in the meetings of the MGFC. A third point to be made here is that without getting into the whole range of opportunities for civil society engagement in the work of UNEP and UNEA specifically, a very important point relates to seats, because this also relates to speaking opportunities. So each major group is allocated seats, and this facilitates oral statements. In this regard, the major groups facilitating committee operates as a channel, as a conduit, so that civil society voices can find their way into occupying one of these seats in order to make oral statements to the UN Environmental Assembly, UNEA. A final point on this slide is that the MGFC has an important role in organizing the global major groups and stakeholder forum. And this takes me then to the next slide. The GMGSF, that's a long acronym, the Global Major Groups and Stakeholders Forum. The overall objective of this forum is to strengthen civil society's voices in UNEA. How do we go about doing that? In this year, there is an agenda that has focused on what are the key themes of UNEA, what is UNEA, what are its key themes, how can we engage those key themes in order to influence the discussions. And so in order to do that, and this is the second bullet there, the work plan includes expert panel discussions, the elaboration of a common statement, and work on thematic clusters. The third bullet, thematic clusters, is intended to articulate civil society's voices around the themes that UNEA will be addressing. And there are 2 baskets or categories of themes. There are UNEA's high-level themes, as was described before. Let's recall themes, discussions on environmental rule of law, on the sustainable development goals, on illegal trade and wildlife and timber, on the one hand, and on the other, UNEA's draft decisions and resolutions, more detailed documents and discussions on, for example, an ecosystems approach or chemicals, etc. The kind of and operational issues relevant to UNEP. So we have here 2 big baskets of themes that will be the bulk of UNEA's work, and the forum will take the key themes and form clusters across major groups. So these clusters will not be based on constituency, they will be open and include the participation of every major group that is interested, but they will focus on the themes in order to strengthen the civil society voices that want to speak on those themes and that bring specialized expertise, knowledge, and viewpoints. And this takes me to the last slide, which is why a global partnership, the relationship between UNEA and civil society. And there are 4 basic reasons why civil society and UNEA are moving into building and strengthening a global partnership for environmental protection. The first one is focused on democratic dialogue, a kind of democratic involvement as a primary function of stakeholder participation. Secondly, civil society engagement is to hold governments to account. Governments and international institutions And in this connection, civil society plays a watchdog role and exercises lobbying power. And a third role is providing technical and contextual expertise that governments and UNEP may not have. All these three roles are key to enabling UNEP and UNEA to carry out their mandate. And they relate to a fourth bullet as expressed here, the notion of global public interests. The challenge often faced by the UN system to overcome the silos defined by political boundaries and state-centered interests, and to think, especially now in an era of globalization, with the advent of the Anthropocene, with the global environmental crisis, to think about humanity's role in the planet and what is the global public interest, especially as it relates to international environmental governance and institutions. It is in this regard that civil society can bring in that holistic and global perspective regarding the value of the environment and sustainability for the protection, as we know, of present and future generations. And with that, I thank you very much. And should there be any questions, I'd be happy to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. That was a very helpful presentation. I think you brought light to the role of the major groups facilitating committee and the key topics to be addressed by civil society at UNEA. It seems like there's been quite a bit of discussion both on the comment thread and over email as to specifically how the children and youth major group can get involved in UNEA. If someone is not already working on topics related to UNEA and we've informed users that the major groups is a great place to get started and get involved in the meeting, how does one go about joining a major group or getting more information about the nine bodies?
Are you asking me?
If you would, yes, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to take on that question. The first thing to say is that the major groups are certainly open to the participation of youth and children. In fact, one of the major groups is composed by youth and children, and they are very much part of the work of the major group facilitating committee. They have had a role in shaping the forum's agenda, and in previous governing council sessions, youth representatives have made important statements to the plenary and otherwise participated in discussions. The way to engage, for anyone to engage this work, is first of all, as was mentioned in another presentation, for their organization to be accredited with UNEP. This will enable that organization to participate with the full panoply of tools that have been identified in the work of UNEP, including UNEA. Once the organization is within this realm, then it will be able to join the meetings of the Youth and Children Major Group, which will then be including election of representatives. The representatives will join the Major Group Facilitating Committee, and so it ties up with the content of my presentation. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Please, Jan Gustav.
Thank you, Matthew. I would like to add to that, even though I am the oldest of the three colleagues here, because I was the youngest person present in Stockholm in 1972. So, and I still remember vividly how a youth or the youth group could actually move the agenda. One of the great things we did then was to build a 30 meters long blue whale of paper mache, and we paraded it through the city of Stockholm, ending up outside the conference place, and actually asking for a moratorium on the blue whale hunting. This was a very useful demonstration and an activity that actually bore some fruit. I'm not saying that one should build demonstrations outside each UN meeting, but the 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 availability of and opportunities available to people who are engaged and committed to work on the environment is massive. And I would say, uh, emphasizing what both Fatou and Marco said, accreditation is important, but it's not difficult to get once you have a proven track record of working on the environmental issues that are relevant to UNEP or to the world, and you work in an organized manner, and you put your energy into it. And I think everybody who comes to the UN after having been accredited will be surprised at the openness and the opportunity to build interactive dialogues and influence the decisions to a large extent. So we need generations across the world, and we need that engagement to move the world into a better space.
Matthew, if I may add something about accreditation, because it has come back in the two responses. Indeed, accreditation is the grants you the observer status to the governing bodies of UNEP and allows stakeholders to participate in all the governance processes. It is not a requirement to participate in partnerships and work on implementation of projects and a number of activities, but it is a prerequisite for participation in governance, participation in processes of the governing bodies. Accreditation is open to international organizations for now. It is open to organizations that can prove that they have been in existence for 2 years and that they have experience in environment, as Jan Gustav had said, and that they can prove their legal existence in a UN member state. Now, having said that, I must also add that accreditation is one of the issues that are being discussed right now at the level of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, and that will be examined by the UNEA next week. It is an issue that is becoming more and more discussed by member states because they want national organizations to have access to UNEP governing bodies, but they are looking also at additional criteria to fulfill to get that accreditation. So we expect that at the end of the UNEA there will be a new rule in the rules of procedures that would guide accreditation in a different manner in an attempt to be more inclusive and to reach out to more organizations from developing countries. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Fatou. And maybe what we can do is in a wrap-up email provide some information on accreditation in writing. It seems like it's been a key point of interest for some of the call's participants. So again, after the call, we will provide presentations that you saw during the webinar and some of the answers to the questions that you provided on the message board. Which of course is will also deal with accreditation. Fatou, back to you. A quick question regarding the private sector's involvement in UNEA. Looking at the types of organizations that are attending the assembly, what seems to be the private sector's involvement?
I have to look at the numbers first in responding to that question, but I will not only limit myself to numbers. Out of 246 pre-registered participants, we have 10% that are coming from the business and industry sector, so the private sector. And for private sector organizations to participate in the UNEA, they also need to be accredited, but they are accredited and participate through associations of business and industry companies. So it's not per se one specific company that will attend the UNEA and be able to take the floor or participate in the sessions, but it's the associations representing one sector that participate and that convey the messages of the private sector. However, currently in this UNEA, we have a number of events where the private sector will have a more prominent role than it used to be. We have a symposium on the green economy, which talks about financing green economy. And some of the participants and the target audience of that particular symposia are private sector companies, insurance, banks, etc. So it is organized by what we call UNEP Finance Initiative, which is based out of London, and which really looks at alternative ways of involving the private sector in financing the green economy. So we have those attending the UNEA throughout, and we also have a number of exhibitions, exhibitors that will join us, and some of them are from the private sector as well. So I hope it answers a little bit the question, Matthew.
That does answer the question, and I think for viewers, there's a call to have access to a schedule for all of the activities at UNEA. So that will be a supplementary resource which we will provide. It's nearly 2:30 or 3:30 here in London, which means we amazingly managed to keep to time. So if there aren't any additional questions, I think this will conclude this webinar, but keep a lookout for an email to come shortly with more information on forthcoming activities of UNEA and details of engagement. So from me, from London, for Stakeholder Forum, thank you for all that have participated in the call, and a special thanks to Marcus, Fatu, and Jan Gustav for making this a very informative session.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
And thank you, Marcos and Jan, and to all that have connected to this video.
Thank you
Wonderful.
so much. Thank you, and see you all in Nairobi.
We will continue this conversation with all of you over email. More to come soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.